we are officially, this is my first recording. I've had January off. It almost feels like I've had a vacation, except it's a startup land, so there's no such thing as a vacation. It's just a slower, busy time. But holy moly, 2026 has started, and I'm in amazing mood because I get to spend some time with one of my favorite humans, Jon Reeve. So Jon, for folks that are brand new to you, if you want to give a quick intro, we're going to talk about what you and the team are doing at ControlTheory, and obviously the whole open ecosystem at large, and all things open telemetry and more.
Sounds good. Yeah, my name's Jon Reeve. I'm the CPO and one of the co-founders here at a company called ControlTheory. My background is lots of startups in the infrastructure space, what used to be called the monitoring space, now the observability space. So, startups and being acquired a few times into larger companies, and everything sort of infrastructure and up. I feel like I've been moving up to the application layer for my whole career, and now we have the AI application layer. It's awesome.
Yeah, it was wild. We always had this thing that, like, I came from the ops background, so I've always had a different sort of view. And this is what always the joke about DevOps. Like DevOps, if you ask somebody to define it, if they're from the ops side, they'll say it's a way to keep control over these goddamn developers that keep just jamming code into production. And then on the developer side, they're like, it's a way to get the ops people out of my way so I can get code into production faster. And it's these like sort of competing, things that are going on. But what I found then when we get into observability, everybody had the same goal, which is, how do I truly ask a question of a system based on its inputs? If you go to the true sort of physics origins of observability as a term, and we all had different ways to feed data into it, but we have a common collective goal coming out, which I think was probably nice. It used to be monitoring, and now we call it observability because we're thinking of it more as a system rather than a bunch of pots of logs and telemetry and traces, et cetera. So Jon, let's just start with, what is observability from your view of the community and from your side of the world?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think that was a reasonable definition, right, in terms of being able to ask questions of your systems, your applications, and understand their behavior. I think that the pivot or change that we're seeing is, okay, well, how do you know what questions to ask, right?
Yeah.
And so in my mind, a lot of the, I won't say legacy, but the current crop of observability solutions that that we have sort of grown up in this era where we've had maybe a centralized team or a few experts that sort of know those tools, maybe have a sort of a sense of what questions to ask, but we ask things up front. But we're now in an era where potentially our applications are changing so quickly in this current era, right? We're moving a million miles an hour. We don't always know up front what questions to ask, right? And furthermore, we sort of have the expertise for a lot of these existing solutions is often contained within a few folks. Maybe in the ops team, for example, it's not really democratized, I would say, meaning as developers or other audiences are iterating on these applications at a million miles an hour, how do they have access to the insights so they can ensure their applications are whole and good ahead of time? And there's many other aspects to it in terms of, there's the technical aspect of that, like how do I sort of know about issues up front very quickly, right? And then the sort of the commercial aspects of it too, meaning how a lot of the observability solutions have gone to market, which has basically been, let's collect all the data and charge you for it, and depend on a human on the other side to look through this data and again know what things to ask and create the right queries and the dashboards and so forth. But I think that whole picture is shifting, right? Because now again we have tooling, we have AI tooling that is enabling us to move really, really quickly. In some cases, 10x. We're hearing maybe 100x sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, how do we deal with that? Like manually building a dashboard to know something ahead of time is like probably not going to work for that, right? So that's sort of, I think, the era we're in. So yeah, monitoring to observability, but now I think one good term I like is sort of this unknown unknowns, which was, I think, something that the observability was there to help us with. But again, it was sort of a manual effort based on the human looking through the data on the back end to try and find those unknown unknowns. Can we surface those unknown unknowns up front, right? Very quickly, maybe to different audiences, including developers, application owners, and so forth, so that we can continue to move very quickly, not just creating these applications, but operationalizing them, right? Which seems to me where the bottlenecks are emerging.
Well, the interesting thing that we learn as we talk more in the world of AI is people now understand what sentiment is, in the fact that systems have sentiment. And I've been a behavioral study, a behavioral science, student for a long time, and I've always enjoyed watching how systems of people behave, and you see patterns, and you start to see things, and we always assume that people are wild, and so it's very hard to find the patterns. And then systems, we believe, are very controlled, but in fact it's actually, they're equally wild on both sides and equally measurable on both sides. It's just that most people don't have enough of a view of the world to discover those patterns, or they're not thinking about it as, I want to look for global, top down patterns. What they try to do is to say, let me very specifically, jam one thing into a log, and people would maybe pop a few extra, pieces of code notation inside their logs. People move towards telemetry and traces, and that's fantastic. But most of those systems that are doing more advanced tracing and more deeper open telemetry type of stuff, they're not going to do it on every app, or they maybe, or like, there's stuff that still just doesn't need a trace to show you that there's something discoverable in there. And I think, I wrote this, and we talked a lot about this, the idea that logs have feelings, so I want to get that shirt that says logs have feelings too. So let's talk about where's the win that we're seeing now with people being able to use sentiment in logging, both in discovering it and creating it.
Yeah. So, sort of back to that, knowing what to query piece of this, right? Like, we previously we've had to sort of know the particular string or the particular error code or whatever in the log to sort of query. If we step back and say, logs are language, logs can talk to us effectively, like a human typically, and now AI obviously are creating logs. And so they're inherently language based. So a connection timeout, for example, is a very different sort of sentiment than, transaction successful, right? So
Yeah.
we can look at those in sort of a non-brittle way, right? We can look at that language and say, is it good language? Is it neutral language? Is it bad language? Obviously, generally, we care more about the bad language than everything, is fine. But we can do that now in a way that doesn't require us upfront to always define this hard-coded thing to query for, right? So we can look for those patterns. We can look for those anomalies. Our systems and our applications can speak to us, if you like, and tell us their feelings, if you like, and that can be a very good signal as to what's going on in our environment. Our customers impacted, and ultimately get to the bottom of the things. Early in my career, I was doing AI stuff, and there's this term of things that are very brittle, right? Meaning it's sort of like the expert systems, rule-based systems, right? Like,
Yeah.
Things are sort of hard-coded, and they're great when things are hard-coded, but if you don't know what to look for, then you're sort of like out of luck, right? So this is a way, sentiment, looking at patterns, looking at the logs, is a way to a priori, if you like, understand behavior up front and point you in the right direction. And I think as we're moving a million miles an hour again, that's sort of the, I'm not going to be able to, always understand to the every specific error code, right? Particularly as we have new audiences creating applications and entering here. So that's sort of what we're working on, and it's been very effective in terms of surfacing issues very quickly up front that maybe you didn't know about ahead of time.
What the other thing that I really like about the fact is you've put this where the people are working, because as we see more and more of people using, sorry, I hate to say it, Claude. As a Frenchman, it's like it hurts me every time to say Claude that way. So people are using Claude, they're using Codex, they're using all these different, terminal utilities and terminal-based coding tools, and they have a preference there. We're dealing with people who traditionally love hotkeys. They think that VI is awesome, not painful. Like we're meeting the developers where they feel comfortable rather than pulling them back to, like, you have to go to a visual dashboard, like seeing what you did with Gonzo.
Mhm.
And I literally use this every bloody day myself because I'm deploying stuff to Heroku all the time. And it's a pain in the butt for me to go through and understand what's going on. So like even last night, I was running a huge batch job on like hundreds of records. And so all I do is I just set up Gonzo to like watch the stream, and then I can see where that sort of derivation of error rates are landing. And then if I need to dig in, strap in and actually dig into a particular log. So what is your view of this terminal world, now that you're seeing more and more people living and breathing inside it's like going back to the 3270 days. Now I'm super dating myself on that one.
Yeah, so it's an example of pushing intelligence to where folks want to consume it, right? So we talked about in legacy observability we've had maybe a couple of people that know the tool and then create the dashboards. Maybe they collaborate with developers, but the dashboard a few days later is already stale, it's out of date. And we've heard this very consistently when a developer gets brought in, let's say to an incident, and they have to consume and use this dashboard, or heck, even the query language, right? They're like, what is this, right? I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah.
So how do we push insights and findings to folks where they work? So in the developer case with Gonzo, which is an open source tool, how do we bubble up patterns to the developer in the terminal from their logs where they work? I mean, you talked about humans and logs, and I've done this, and you've probably done this and observed this with engineers you've worked with, but logs are streaming in. The first thing you often see engineers and developers do is like the classic group by, like, well, which ones are having the most errors, right? Or which service is having the most errors? Group by error, and service, and show me in like a histogram, because you're trying to find out where the pain is, right? Where the signal is. And so that was the intent behind Gonzo, was to, let's start with the pattern, right? Let's give you the pattern right up front. Which ones are errors? Which services are having the most errors, or whatever, and find that. And so that was an example of pushing that into the terminal. And I think developers are also using obviously IDEs and AI IDEs now that you mentioned. We have ways to consume these insights, for example, MCP, things of that nature, that don't require us again to define things a priori. Like this notion of a static dashboard that I have, that I define to look for a known issue. Now we can, hey, okay, I see this, hey, whoever, control theory, whoever, like, what's going on in my logs right now? What are the key patterns? What are the key issues that are happening right now? Which services are impacted? Like, which customers are impacted? So, and that's another interesting thing, is the developers obviously a key audience for this, and pushing these operational insights back to them where they work. But there's other audiences in the business, right? There's customer success. There's like, which customer's impacted right now? Is it my cash cow? Should I care about this? Like, what do I need to do, right? And then how you present that information. So I think the whole world of observability, in terms of how people consume the information, I call it almost like just in time, with enough context. Like, give me the right context for what I'm doing right now and what I need to know right now, versus me having to define ahead of time. It's another example of this, not having to know ahead of time. Shouldn't the system be able to figure it out and tell me what I need to care about? And so that's, I think it's a paradigm shift in terms of how observability is being consumed, from a UX perspective, right?
Well, I think you nailed the sort of the problem that we face, is that context needs to be discovered, not created. Dashboards imply that you're creating a future context that will fit a set of rules and a set of guides. You're effectively creating a query for predictable stuff, the known knowns, to sort of keep on that Rumsfeld series of descriptions. But what you're able to do now is like let the stream go, go through static logs, go through streams, go through whatever, and then from that develop context and then create a view based on that context, that's the right. I love that direction because, as you said, we can't always know what's going to be the problem. If you suddenly get a, error 1, success, okay, fail, like I have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah, we've heard about that and the normal error, and that's another great reason for sentiment, right? Because sentiment can look deeper and look at the language, not just the severity, which often may or may not reflect what is actually going on. But so absolutely, and the other thing here is we want to find issues early, right? We want to find issues in dev, we want to find issues in staging, particularly if we're moving a million miles an hour. I think back to the commercial aspect, like we've been, it's been hard for us to do that because we pay for all the stuff we ingest and store, right? So if you go to a customer, typically they're like, I run it in production, and I maybe even run it on a subset of my stuff in production. I can't afford to run it in staging and dev, but in a lot of ways, that's exactly where you want to run this stuff because you want to find issues early, right? As you're moving quickly. So I think that whole flip as well, meaning if you start with the picture of I'm trying to analyze all the information and give you insights very quickly versus I'm trying to store all the information and then have a human analyze it after the fact, that's a very different intent you're starting from. So, and that's part of what we're doing here as well is let's analyze all your logs in real time as they're flying by. We don't need to store them all, right? Like that's not our goal. Our goal is insight and analysis and getting you to the problem very quickly. We don't have to store your logs to do that. We can analyze them all, but we don't need to store them all. So that's a different sort of commercial picture here. And it also means that we can, deploy now. Yeah, go for it. Deploy it in dev, deploy it in all the places, right? Deploy it in dev, deploy it locally, deploy it in staging. Let's have this analysis, right? And it is interesting because certain personas obviously, for example, work in the company and the ops persona is more interested in staging and production, obviously, which sort of makes sense. But the developers are very interested in the development environment, right, and what's going on there, and getting insights into their service and their application. So, but yeah, flipping that model. If you start with the intent of analyzing versus storing, like then it changes a lot of things underneath.
Yeah, all I'm saying, and this is a very human pattern that we see, is that we store everything. And I think I always joke that I've got a 9-pin serial to RJ45 Cisco control cable, just in case. There's not a Cisco device anywhere near my world that will ever use that 9-pin out cable. But there's something in my brain that says if I get rid of this, I'm going to get somebody giving me a free Cisco switch and it's going to need a 9-pin to, I'm like, so we hang on to a lot. And that seems sort of comical in our house because I got a box of cables for things that don't exist. But when you do that at scale with logs that are costing, even if it's pennies an hour, those pennies add up at Superman level scale, right?
Exactly. And 99% of them you're never going to look at again. And yes, there are ones you need to store for compliance and all that, and audit and all that goodness, but a lot of them you're never going to use and ever look at again. And actually, you're seeing, on that note, you're seeing a very small window of my office here, but I am a little bit of a hoarder. If I switch my camera around, I have a lot of trinkets. And my wife likes to tell me that, and I'm like, well, they have sentimental value, honey, and I want to, So yes, we this human thing of like, let's store it all, like we should capture everything, and like, but really, our intent a lot of the time is, is the analysis, right? Like, well, what if you could analyze them all without having to store them all, right? And how would that, mix things up? What if we could show you those patterns, show you that sentiment, and retain for contextual information, some samples of what you need to sort of support that and back that up. But we again, it's a very different flip. And logs are ubiquitous. Yes, they're also language, as we talked about, but they're ubiquitous. Everyone has them. Developers use them. Traces can be very powerful, certainly. But again, you've got to get folks to adopt them and be consistent across teams, and the whole me versus not me thing, right? So logs are just a massive signal that, and oftentimes what we found talking to customers is logs have the why behind what's happening. It's just finding them is a nightmare because of all this noise we talked about, right? The proverbial needle in the haystack. What if we could start with why? There's that famous book, like, okay, well, let's look at the log up front and start with why and tell you what's happening, right? Versus you doing it after the fact in a reactive way. So that was some of the impetus or driver for what we're doing.
Yeah, and especially, it's funny, like, talk about that, like, it has sentimental value when we think of, like, why do we keep all these things? And it's literally no different for system logs. Like, we hang on to all this because you never know, one day, like, that there might be something in here that we need. And it is good to be able to sort of catch it in real time, but also to go back and revisit it. Like, and that's the ability to take a pack of logs and then analyze them individually. And there's so many ways that you can use what you're doing as both, real time and then over time. And I think that's that. So you've got the forensic capability, but you can also be as real-time forensic as possible. And that's where, and it can be everywhere. And that's also the biggest thing. Like, as he said, it's, we can do this in every environment, but then we immediately get overrun with the amount of data we got to store and where do we put it. And if you're using a commercial back end, those things add up over time. And and then what do you do? What do you get rid of? Well, like, we can actually figure out what we should be keeping, probably, if we catch it up front. And observability should be done from the first line of code out. Like, build observability. We talk about shift left security, but it really is shift left of everything. Of, can we be prepared so that when this does hit every stage of the environment, then we understand how it behaves across the life cycle of that application.
Absolutely. I mean, as you talk to customers, the classic thing is, maybe something happens in production, right? We figure it out. We do a postmortem. We go back and add queries, or we add some instrumentation maybe and add some queries to look for that thing. And then, end of the month or end of the quarter or whatever, the CFO comes in, like, observability bill's too high. We got to whack some stuff. So we start whacking. And then you got the classic, well, fear of unknown. What am I missing? Like, now, what should I whack? Maybe I don't whack those things we knew about, but there's other things that whack that could lead to issues. So you've got this sort of fear of the unknown. Well, what if you don't have to do that, right? What if you can have your cake and eat it too, if you like? Like, what if you can analyze this all the time without incurring costs, telling you sort of issues proactively, which is, again, where I think this whole reactive versus proactive thing, right, is AI and other systems should inform us and tell us about this stuff up front. Like, we're not designing anymore for somebody to always navigate through vast volumes for a human to navigate through vast volumes of data to try and find the needle. We need systems that surface the needle very quickly to us up front. Because again, quite frankly, that's the only way we're going to keep up with, I think, the modern development. When I say modern, I mean, like, in the last 2 weeks or last month, I mean, the pace of change is obviously crazy here, right? But yeah, absolutely. And you shouldn't have to have that trade-off, right? Which is, I think, where a lot of the current solutions have sort of driven us to.
And I think the amount of people that are going to generating business code without wanting to wrap in systematized understanding of the code, because it's very easy. I mean, we always joke about the vibe coders who are just like, build a Salesforce equivalent, make it secure, no M dashes. Like, and then they just send that prompt into Cloud Code, and they come back and, in 12 hours, I built a whole Salesforce alternative. And you're like, that's great. But now what? you own that thing for the rest of time. There's a reason why Salesforce is nearly $1 trillion company, because they got a bunch of people who are keeping their eye on it and developing things. Like, it's cool that you had a nifty idea. And trust me, I vibe coded plenty of things that are something alternatives. And I immediately know that when I put that sucker into production, that I own that thing. And somebody goes to use it and they're like, oh, it didn't work. And now I'm like, oh. Like, this is where people think they could vibe code a little TUI tool, or they could vibe code their own observability storage system. You're like, do you really want to own that thing for the rest of time?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you build it, you own it. Whereas, a sales guy used to work, a person I used to work with, there's no such thing as a free kitten, right? So,
yeah.
And absolutely. And so, we're seeing that, right? In terms of, I mean, it is amazing what can be created, but it's the iceberg thing or whatever. The cost of ownership of that thing is the operational part, right? And so, I think that the mindset is shifting to that, where we're at right now, because you're right, a lot of business users aren't going to care, right? They'll make it work, right? And I don't care, right?
Yeah.
But if we can, sort of meet those folks too, like I said, I mean, there's other audiences that are, the great thing about logs is that they have a lot of this. I mean, a lot of the time, for example, they could tell a customer success person what's impacted, or if their customer's impacted, or what's, in terms they can communicate to their customers. So that the logs sort of drive multiple constituents, right? That may need the problem defined in a slightly different way or slightly different language. The developer obviously may need a certain language. The ops person might need a different language. The customer success person might need it framed up slightly differently. But it's coming from a lot of the same raw materials, right? And that's sort of interesting, because there's an interesting sort of consolidation thing here, right? We've had a lot of, historically, I guess it's sort of unfolding in front of our eyes, but we've had a lot of products which have been very verticalized, right? Or focused on a very specific use case and persona. And they sort of, a lot of the products use the same raw materials. It's sort of like a skin on top of what I would call, what's a Gonzo skin, but like a way, a different view into the information that's relevant to me. And I think that's sort of another interesting, I think the thing that's going to rapidly unfurl here, right? Because, it's not just, as you point out, traditional devs that are creating these applications.
Yeah, and we were seeing more, I'll say, like, it's the rise of the product owner, and the rise of the product manager, in that there's so much freedom to now describe features in that true user story. And that's the one thing I think that's a blessing of AI developer tools, is that now, now every developer knows what it's like to be that angry product manager. Go, just make the thing come up. Like, they're screaming into their prompts. Like, why is it square? I asked for this to be circular. And so they're screaming at these poor virtual developers who are just like, yes sir, yes sir. But we can, it is the idea of, like, I call it, we see this in politics, is like one movie, two screen, or one screen, two movies, where people have, like, the angle at which you look at it is going to be different. And that's by design. So as a product owner, I'm going to see there's different value to how I observe my system versus the raw code up developer who's got to think of system stability and reliability. But it's the same system generating the same outputs that have to be measured and displayed for two different audiences. So how do you have done a lot of things in your own career, both, at the keyboard and now, as a multi-time startup founder. This must feel like a beautiful culmination of all of those skills now that you can present through product.
Yeah, well, the product management joke you made there sort of resonated with me. I spent most of my career in product management. So Yeah, why is it circular? I asked for it to be square. So yeah, everyone's feeling that pain now. But yeah, and our CTO is sort of like, well, everyone's becoming a product manager.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, I think that is true. But yeah, it's sort of the culmination of a lot of those things. Which is, yes, everyone's a product manager, but the ops angle we talked about, just it's a tricky one because you've heard it too. I've heard this in the past too. It's sort of like ops is almost, or observability is almost like the classic insurance policy, the sort of thing you worry about, as a sort of an insurance thing. But it is the operational ownership of this, right? So as you launch it, as you operate it, there's other constituents in the business that care about it. And
Yeah.
if you're smart, you're going to think about those personas, right, sort of up front, meaning, okay, this is what the customer success person needs, this is what the support or agent needs. And because it may not always be a person, I guess, these days. So yeah, it is the culmination of a lot of those things, and it's clearly very disruptive, right? We're seeing that sort of on a daily basis, I think.
So thinking of this, is the other problem I think we have with observability and monitoring is always, there's many personas that consume it. And there's also many like company personas, people personas, and also observability is not, there's no one product. And this is what's funny because you partner with observability tools and you consume observability output from other tools, and some people would say like, oh, isn't there like one observability ring to rule them all? But there never is, and I don't think there ever should be. So I think it's a beautiful way because you're targeting a very distinct and specific problem in the life cycle. So maybe Jon, I'd love to hear who's the customer that's really winning with you right now, and where do you see the edges where you don't necessarily want to play, or where co-opetition is really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, right now our focus is on folks that are moving fast. Obviously, industries you probably imagine that care about observability, they care about uptime, they care about their applications, because everyone cares to it to a certain degree, right? But it's really important in terms of the dollar value of downtime and those kinds of things. But the ops persona is probably our starting place, just in terms of helping them understand what's happening in their environments faster, get to the bottom of issues. But very quickly that moves beyond the ops persona into the development team, for example. Like, well, we had one last week actually, was like, well, I've spotted this issue in staging because we're using your product. We've got an issue in our application, it's requesting null bytes or something from the database, or the recurring, and then okay, take that to the developers. Well, the developers like, well, give me evidence. How many times has that happened? Like, is that what's the impact? Has it happened a lot? Like in the last, in the X window. So pushing that out to the developers so they can ultimately self-serve is, I think, one of our goals beyond sort of the ops persona as well. Bubbling that up in terms of to higher level personas, right? So you're right, we're looking at stuff real time. We're automatically finding issues, surfacing those in plain English, giving you the impact of those issues. But what are the most recurring issues? It's sort of like, probably dating myself a little bit, but almost like problem management, right? Well, which services have been the most reliable? Which ones have been the most unreliable? Where do we need to work to improve things over time, right? So this basically improving reliability, not just say break fix, but not just fixing things faster, but how do we actually improve over time? So that's a big. And then we have heard about folks are inside customer success, other folks in the business, as I mentioned, they're inside a lot of these observability tools today, trying to figure out, is my customer impacted, right?
Yeah.
And it's not always, ironically, it's not always the root. I know we all like to talk about the root cause a lot, but oftentimes it's the impact, right? Which is, I spoke to a very senior SRE and recently at a large company, and he was like, basically, I spend most of my day reporting to management, telling them who and what is impacted, right? Like,
Right.
again, is it a cash cow? Is it this and that? I'm getting pinged by all sorts of, folks in the management team, and that's basically where I spend my day. So that's a very, very important part, right? Which is, again, in the needle in the haystack, which needles do you need to pay attention to more than others, right? Like, and that kind of thing. So that gives some sense, I think, starting with ops, moving out to dev, moving up to, CTs, CTOs, VP of engineering. But then I think there's clear business value to other stakeholders in the business that we're starting to see as well.
I think at every layer, the whole purpose of observability, as much as it is finding the right question to ask, it is noise reduction at scale for every audience. So for the system, builder there, I want to reduce the amount of junk I need to worry about as this thing is streaming out logs while I'm doing development, And so they can't be looking at it because there's just no way. There's so many things that are going on, especially when you've got async communications. Systems are not linear, simple, scaling things. They are very dynamic. And then more and more systems are speaking to each other, which means then you have to understand how. So the whole thing for me as an ops person is I want to take in as much and then get rid of what I don't need to care about. Because there's nothing worse than when you get into that call and someone's like, hey, we've got a problem with this product, for this customer. And then an ops person goes and they said, oh, I see, we've got an error here, PC load letter, whatever it's going to be. And then they go, oh, so they start chasing that thing. And then someone goes, hey, that's been there for like 2 years, right? Like this is not the actual issue. So being able to know what to ignore to me is as important as what to look for.
Absolutely. And I think that's, as we work with, our early design partners and customers, that's key, right? Like, again, which are my most important services, which are the ones I care about. Again, the needles within the needles, right? And it's funny, I remember a conversation, I think it was with someone from Google, actually, a number of years ago, and they're like, anything at scale starts to look like noise, right? At real scale.
Yeah.
And so you're right, like it's really about, well, how do you distill that down to what I need to care about right now and what I need to do about it, right? And that, that's the problem in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, it's as much elimination and deletion without, actually deleting it. It's like, how can we delete it from view, while retaining it, because there may be other things over time, because that's the other thing. It's like patterns don't become patterns right away, behaviors don't necessarily align until we begin to observe them over a longer history. That if you stretch out the event horizon, we suddenly start to see different patterns.
Yeah, I love this emergent behavior thing. I don't, probably dating myself again, but like in the early, like sort of flocks of birds fly. They do things individually, but when you put them on mass at scale, you see these amazing sort of emergent patterns and things behave. I guess that's what I'd like to say. That's what we're focusing on. Almost, if you call it emergent observability, but what patterns are the key things that emerge from the data at scale, so we can get to to the bottom of issues and those that are impacted by them. But yeah, it's fascinating, sort of. It's like you say, like in a very small system, the behaviors are known, the failure modes are known, but at scale, it's like everything changes, right? So,
well, so then with that, let's talk about what's inside Mobius and Distillate. That, because I jumped in with Gonzo just because I love it. Number one of the coolest the coolest emblems and characters. It is such a beautiful way to describe how, when I'm working with it, he's like my little buddy over here. But the idea of moving up into that true collective SaaS delivery, where not only can I, as a consumer of Distillate, get advantage from my systems, but now how do I, as a Distillate customer, now gain from the scale that you're working at as ControlTheory now with multiple customers?
Yeah, so the way we've done that, and the way we surface the value to you is basically through a number of layers. So we work at the edge. So we have a very fast agent that works at the edge, looks at every log, analyzes every log at scale, puts it into patterns. We're using a lot of traditional algorithms too, right? That are very fast, well proven, because we're operating at the edge at very high volumes. Put those into patterns, analyze sentiment, essentially summarize the data in a format we can that we then send up to our SaaS to analyze it further. And again, we're distilling a lot of that, right? So we're not sending up, let's say 90% of the logs we don't send up, right? We send up very small summarized patterns and sentiment information at the edge at scale. And then we have a couple of layers in our SaaS. So one that we have our own small language model that we've tuned specifically for looking at logs and correlating logs and bringing in inferencing across different services, for example, and different log streams. And then finally, we have an agent, our own agent, that continuously looks at this information all the time. So reviewing the patterns, reviewing the sentiment, reviewing across the whole environment, across your cluster, Kubernetes cluster or multiple clusters, to proactively identify what we call incidents. So hey, there's a problem here. Here's the impact of that problem. Here's how long, here's when it started. Here's how long it's been going. Here's a plain English explanation of it. Here's what the next steps in terms of what you need to do about it. So sort of that, I guess, exoskeleton sort of, or Iron Man suit, whatever you want to, trying to augment the person, right? Like not replace the person. But again, put it into language that the ops persona can understand and take action on. And again, with that, with all we just talked about in terms of tuning of, here's the things you really need to care about and focus on. So there's a, edge distillation, and then a couple of layers in our SaaS. It's almost like an inverted pyramid sort of, or a pyramid where a lot of data comes in the bottom. We distill it all the way to a point at the top where we give you the incident, the insight, and then communicate that to where you work, right? So that could be Slack, that could be, we have MCP integration. So, you can get those insights, again, where you work in your IDE, you can analyze those patterns, those sentiment on your side too. So that's sort of that change in UX that we talked about in terms of, you don't have to be in front of our UI all the time, right? We can meet you where you work and give you those insights there.
Well, I think this is one of the most beautiful things about the way you've really tuned yourself to every audience is, let's bring the knowledge to you. You send the data to us, and we'll send the knowledge back to you and where you live and where you work, because that is having to service multiple audiences is where a lot of the bigger players, I'll say like sort of the classics, so the Splunks, the Dynatraces, folks like that. And, I came from the IBM world, having been acquired, and there's a very different type of person that consumes those big enterprise dashboards, but very quickly you find that they aren't adapting because those dashboards are brittle and rigid, as we talked about at the very beginning, that they depend on a certain set of criteria coming in and a certain specific known set of patterns that we're just waiting to occur. But we're defining the pattern and then sending data through it until it fits in. It's like those, put a square in the square hole, put the round in the round hole. But really, what observability is you can put the circle thing through the square hole, and the triangle thing through the square hole, and the star thing through the square hole. So you've got to be looking for what's coming out, not waiting for it to fit the template.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's so true. And you think about the rate of development we have now. I remember I've worked in larger organizations too, and having the classic checklist, and have you done this and have you done that, and don't get me wrong, that some of those things are important, but you think about the speed we're operating now. New thing, new application, new. I mean, not just a new feature, a whole new thing is rolling out, and historically, maybe on the checklist, the developer got together with the ops person and they talked about, here's what, here's some of the instrumentation, here's maybe what we should look for, things like you think about that, it's like in the current sort of climate, like how's that going to work? People are
Yeah.
just they're just going for it, right? Like, and it's existential too, right? I mean, with many of these customers, I'm sure you're hearing like, if we don't move fast, and we don't use this stuff, our competitors will, right? So we're going to be out of business. So it's an existential sort of velocity thing, right? Like, which is not to say you shouldn't be careful. Obviously, that, and again, I think there's even observability and things like, putting guardrails. Obviously, a lot of folks talk about guardrails and testing and like, yes, these are stochastic systems, but there's ways to sort of put a box around it. Observability sort of plays into that, right? But again, like, you're not going to know everything up front. So how do you analyze for these emerging patterns? And can you just use logs as the raw materials to do that? And that's sort of where we've been focusing.
And what the idea of people sort of poo-poo AI because they say, oh, it's non-deterministic. It can't possibly write code in a systems view. I'm like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with how your developers work, but they're fairly non-deterministic as well. Yeah. Like, we'd love to think that we know exactly what's going to happen, but like, everybody has nuances to the way they build. And even just in the adoption levels of AI tooling, we went from, it's like the cloud revolution. I remember I worked in a financial services organization in Canada. So we were super regulated and even like provincially regulated with where we could store certain information. So the public cloud was not even an option. Well beyond when it was a ubiquitous option for everybody else. And all of a sudden, that thing just flipped overnight. And it was like, we need to be using the best of the cloud in a safe way. And it was like, okay. And then now it's just like YOLO cloud. Like, we were just firing. And the adoption to AI has done the same thing where we're like, let's just ease up there, kids. Let's slow down before, make sure we know how it's going to be consumed. And now, as you said, the world is all consuming it and using it. So everybody's moving at a pace of their neighbor, not necessarily their own, but they don't have the guardrails. So how do you see what you're doing with Distillate, and also like maybe giving them the guardrails they don't know they need, by showing them the stuff that's leaking through into their log world?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, our focus has been more on the ops side, so far. But again, a lot of the logs that we consume, they're used for both purposes, right? You can call it, I don't know, the security observability, or observability security, but using the same raw materials for a different sort of lens. It all falls in my mind into that unknown unknowns. So, surfacing the unknown unknowns, whether that's sort of an ops issue or a security issue, is definitely something. And then, certainly where to focus this, and the lens that you put on it, is we talked about that already in terms of, some tuning and which services are more important than others, and the impact analysis piece of this and that kind of stuff. But I think that's definitely, again, we want to sort of nail the ops part of this and make sure we're whole there, because that's sort of where we're starting. But absolutely, there's, we're already seeing incidents and findings and things of that nature that are meaningful from the security side as well.
Yeah, the surprising amount of consumers, and also just because realizing often in hindsight what we're shipping in, as far as like maybe not necessarily PII, but a reasonable amount of proprietary stuff is leaking through these things, which has value, but there's also value and risk. And sometimes the only way to find it is by having something that can say, hey, by the by, we're seeing customer numbers all over the place, and it's starting to include, we're seeing emails show up and stuff like that. Like, oh, okay, maybe, if people are growing their own observability tooling, they're probably not going to be spending a lot of time worrying about filtering and masking and stuff like that. So, because they're trying to build products and business logic, not worrying about, are we safely observing, are we safely storing, or Like, so that's where having you come from the outside and having Distillate and even Gonzo be able to like see what's going on and highlight that, so that it's like a little friend over here that's telling you, hey, we're seeing this thing happen while you're working.
That's exactly it again, because we're, by analyzing every log, right, we're going to see all those things. Again, we're not storing all those things, but we're analyzing all those things. And, for example, in the open telemetry world, there's ways to sort of in the collector filter PII and things of this, but how do you know it's there in the first place, right? Like, again, back to the a priori thing, like that's awesome. But, and again, and the thing that we talked about, right? Well, like I can't actually store all my logs because it's cost prohibitive, so I turn a bunch of it off anyway. So you get into those whole things. But yeah, what if you could analyze it all and surface those insights to you that you didn't even know about, right? And in the vein of moving fast and understanding faster, things are gonna happen.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna want to know about those. I'm pretty sure pretty quickly.
What the other thing that's why I often urge people, I'm super into like building tooling that is fits my specific use case, which is I'm kind of like the nightmare customer, because I want to get as much of a customized solution that really is going to fit my need. But I also understand I want commodity. I want great coffee, but I want great coffee that I can find anywhere. So I'm trying to find the right balance of this stuff. And the problem we've got I see with vibe coding is people are walking down the road of starting to build their own thing because they want to, like, hey, I'm using a massive enterprise logging tool and it's killing my budget. So I'm going to just vibe code my own little internal proprietary solution.
Yeah.
And that's cool. But then like, now what?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we're seeing that too. Meaning I vibe coded this thing. So, hey, I'm going to go vibe code my own, analysis tool, log analysis tool at scale. Okay, well, but so yeah, and that's sort of symptomatic. You've probably seen of just the market trajectory, and eventually, I think folks will be like, yeah, that's not core competence. Again, there's still things that can help us, and things we need to focus on, right, from our core business perspective. But that's sort of a little bit of where we're at in terms of the I think the market maturation, right, or the maturity curve, or whatever you want to call. So you are going to see those things.
And building it, with open source in as part of your ecosystem. So looking at Gonzo in particular, it rocketed up real quick to, quick adoption. I'm seeing, PRs coming in. I'm seeing issues and like really interesting stuff. What surprised you about the way it got adopted, and maybe stuff that you're seeing in those PRs and those issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, we released Gonzo, I think back August of last year, and our CTO actually was a weekend or a couple sort of weekend project, and sort of a test experiment, like see what happens. And I think overall we're very surprised, right, in terms of the uptake, number of stars, the number of users, the engagement from the community in general. And it's interesting, you sort of look at sort of at least folks that sort of have started or are engaging in the community. And yeah, I mean, there was this early on, I think there was a lot of, I mean, we sort of modeled it a little bit after K9s, so great tool. K9s is a TUI for understanding and managing your Kubernetes clusters, and we've always liked that, and I think we were inspired a lot by that. And so there's been some, good sort of Kubernetes uptake, I'd say. So folks that are, we've integrated with K9s, we've integrated with other Kubernetes things, and that kind of stuff. But there's also a lot of other people using it, like front end engineers, and so they're not all sort of ops persona. There's actual developers and other roles sort of using it. So that was sort of an eye opener as well to me. People still love their logs, so we do, as we stream the logs, obviously we put them in patterns, we find anomalies, we allow you to hook up to an AI model so if you do get one of those PC load letters, hey, what does this mean? That could be a local model or a hosted model. But folks still want to look at a lot of times the sort of raw logs. So, the full screen mode we got a request for, and the different columns. Obviously, there's structured logs, lots of different formats, all over the place. And so we did some work there to sort of make that more config driven. So if you have a different format or one that we don't, we try and obviously do that out of the box, auto adapt the format to what's coming in. But so a lot of just interesting different types of users, different types of use case. One that's been really interesting is, again, Gonzo. Our focus on Gonzo has been more real time, honestly. Again, streaming real time.
Right.
You can stream from CloudWatch, you can stream from Loki, you can stream from obviously the CLI and from your Kubernetes cluster. But there's been a number of use cases where people are like, hey, I got these sort of audit logs, I got this massive file of logs, historical, can you analyze that too? We're like, yeah, you can do that, but that wasn't the intent for what we created it for. So that classic, I guess, one of those product management moments of, oh, okay, people are using it for that, huh? It's interesting. So, but yeah, we actually have we got a little so not really a webinar, but a tips and tricks session coming up in a couple of weeks. Sort of, we'll be talking about the behind the scenes of Gonzo, tips and tricks.
Oh, nice! That's awesome.
A little bit of roadmap stuff, and hoping to get some good engagement there.
And I think that's the wonder of being able to build in an open source world, but also seeing like you're immediately leaning into, hey, there's a real commercial enterprise side of this. And the fact that you delineated right out of the gate with like, hey, this is here for you. Everybody can tap into it and you can use it. And if you want to centralize this and bring Mobius into it and get that continuous analysis, now it's like, oh, okay. And I think, doing this in the exact fashion that I would model any company to do is like build in the open, find the things that are working, take somebody up to a place where they need to be, in the Steve Jobs way of like, people don't know what they need until you give it to them. And you've done that and immediately had both sides of the world available so that people can know that if I'm building with this team, they've got a path up to enterprise versus a lot of pure open source tooling companies. People are kind of worried. They're like, is it going to stay in the direction that I want? How do I get support? And I think there's a beauty in open source, but there's also a beauty in open source as an enterprise offering.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think we were pretty intentional about it. But again, you try things, you experiment things, but yeah, that, Gonzo is great, right? I mean, Gonzo's a great open source product, as you mentioned, to use on your terminal, to use. We want to give back to the community, right? Genuinely, and it's great that people are getting value from it. But on the same side, we are a business. We have we're here to make money too, and Distillate is the always on version of that, as you mentioned, the continuous, always looking. So you don't have to. We're looking across your whole environment for you all the time, and I think there's a good linkage there. We're trying to always figure out how to make that linkage better and move people from one to another. But and it obviously just from an awareness perspective, Gonzo helps the company, right? And it helps people know we exist and all those cool things. So and it and other things.
So what have you found, having been a product builder for across many organizations and over many, iterations of the industry, what do you feel the most, joy over what we have now with technology and AI, and what 2026 has started as for you, thinking as a product builder?
Yeah. I mean, I think as a product builder, certainly if I were starting today, I mean, the sky's the limit, right? I mean, if you can think it, you can sort of build it, and that's kind of crazy. I mean, we haven't really been in a place like this before, right? I mean, we've had infrastructure. I mean, cloud was a big deal because we could build stuff without having to have a data center in our bedroom, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
But we still had to do. There's still a lot of work we had to do, but now, I mean, I think it's just the scary part is I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to predict, I think, for any of us, right? Like where it's going to go, and what the implications of all this are.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think maybe a couple of steps, but I don't know, like, and so, um, but from the product builder perspective, like, I mean, it's just an amazing time, right? And again, if you can think it, you can pretty much build it, or at least at the very least prototype it, right? And maybe even start to scale it. So yeah, that's cool. But I mean, you mentioned it too. Like some of the product management pieces of this are also important, right? Like how do you know what to build in the first place,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Speaking of a priori, right, and knowing what so as you mentioned, everyone's a product manager. The good news is everyone is. The bad news, everyone is, right? So
Yeah. The the joy for me definitely is, like you said, is the possibilities are seemingly endless.
mhm,
The risks are also seemingly endless, and
mhm,
it's now going to be finding that optimal balance between what we can do versus what we should do, or versus
mhm,
the way in which we should do it. And I think
mhm,
that's where we'll find people experiment. But I mean, I think of this as like, it's like the App Store. When the App Store opened, what happened? There were 3,000 to-do list apps, right? And I think that's because people realize, like, this, I could go and I could get a template in Objective C and I can write my own to-do list app. And so there were all of them, and it created this beautiful ecosystem where the ones that stood the test of time, Todoist as an example, like, they're
mhm,
still a to-do app. They've added
mhm,
more stuff to it, but it's like very few people lasted. But it
mhm,
was a beauty in that everybody could, it
mhm.
was democratized and commoditized. And now AI has kind of done the same thing. So I think the wave will die off, and all the to-do apps will start to, everything that has right now a 5-week-old commit on GitHub, in 2 years it'll have a 2-year and 5-week old commit, last commit. Like, there's just going to be this dead internet of GitHub repos.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
but I think I love that you're bringing years of industry proof, and you've executed it, and it's already seeing traction. Like, that's where the very human element of what you and the team are doing, and looking how, in chatting with Bob and chatting with Eric, like, how do you approach this problem? And it's not, yeah, we've got these amazing tools so we can do anything now. It's like, no, 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 no. We've always known this was the problem to solve, and now we've got the ability to get there faster with the customers. And for me, is just, that's the beauty in what we've got available to us, that
Mhm, mhm,
you can move so much closer to the customer, versus before it was like, you had to build a thing that they didn't know they needed, then you had to sell them on the idea of needing it, then you had to sell it to them, then you had to sit with them in production and find out the hard way that it wasn't quite what they needed. And that
mhm.
whole iteration cycle now is so much faster. it's it's
Yeah,
it's beautiful, and it's proven, like I said, that cycle's available to everybody. But you're actually, like, you're seeing uptake, which is, as everybody can run, but not everybody can run a sub 3 hour marathon or a 3 hour marathon. I love that you're already in that range. And so, congratulations, to the team on seeing those early wins, and it's starting to pick up.
yeah. No, I've done a half marathon. Never quite made it
Yeah.
to.
Well, guess what? You're in a marathon now.
Well, yeah, startup is definitely a marathon. It's a very good analogy. People think about racing and it's sort of that happens, but it's more of a marathon. You know, there's always going to be ups and downs and all the rest of it, right? And you gotta last the distance. So,
And one thing I want to close out on, which I think is in effect the culmination of everything that we've just talked about at KubeCon in Atlanta, not even that many weeks or months ago, practical AI for SREs. You approached it from a messaging side so differently than how everybody else is, like the AI SRE. So let's talk about, why did that work so well? And why did it come out of you? And why did it stick so well as we now look at, people moving fast?
I think, both you and I have been through some of these transitions before, and whatever you want to call it, automation, what have you. And the reality is, yes, we're doing amazing things with AI. We're automating more than ever, but at least in the short to medium term, there's still this is still human augmentation, right? This is not. You talk through the phases, for example, in terms of how customers think, right? It's like, can you detect the problem? Can you sort of tell me how to go fix the problem? And then maybe at some point and see, you'll maybe automate that, but although I still have a human in the loop, that whole sort of maturity model of how people adopt automation, right? And so, having been through that before, people need to build trust, right? I mean, there's a whole trust. I mean, we've been going through it the last couple of years with these technologies, right? So people need to build trust, and this is augmenting the human, hence the Iron Man suit, the exoskeleton. We've heard that term, like just making me better, right? Making me better as an ops person, as an SRE. And I think you're right, that really worked and resonated well, right? Yes, there's this sort of AI SRE sort of market. Again, it's a use case, it's a vertical for how to apply AI, basically, right, in the ops world. But I think the message resonated with the folks on the ground that are doing the job today and probably will be doing the job tomorrow, right? And need help doing it. And that was, so that worked. I mean, we had many times folks would come, oh, AI for SRE. Well, I'm an SRE, and like, oh, this is for me. That's great. It's for you. It's not to replace you, right? And I think that was very different from how a lot of other folks, I think, were sort of showing up. And it's also sort of like not, it's the over promise, under deliver thing, right? Which comes back to the trust thing again. Like, first do job one well, then job two, and then you earn the right to do job three, right?
Yeah, I think this is the what I really always enjoyed, and luckily you and I have had sort of we've had these fun parallel careers, and we've been meeting in and out of the industry for over a decade now, which is kind of wild. And there are so few people that understands the human element and how technology with the human lens is what makes it stick and makes it valuable. And that you came right out of the start with, we are going to help you, not replace you. I always tell people, like, you automate yourself into a job, not out of it. It's not meant to be there. And when I see companies and the first thing they say is like, oh, how do you price your thing? And then they say, well, how much are you spending on observability today? You're like, hold on there, Chuck. This is not how just tell me how much the bloody thing is. This is, I want to know how much my gym membership costs, not, well, what services would you like to use? Like, no, like, you are just immediately like, this is what we can do. And this is where the value is. But more importantly, this is what we free you up to do without having to start with this like dance around like, well, we're trying to replace you, but not really. And so immediately when I look at any product that says, it's going to replace an FTE, I'm concerns that they don't understand what the adoption model really looks like. Because I had a CIO, and this is my favorite thing. We said, we're going to buy I bought a bunch of tools, we're going to build this whole system, and the whole goal is we're going to do this. If we buy this, then we can effectively eliminate an FTE worth of budget for the year. That was kind of the justification that my CIO would give me. Very traditional, sort of conservative, like, let's think of the money of what we're doing, as an ROI. And so we handed the plan. Here you go. We can effectively replace an FTE. That's why this $200,000 tool, is offset easily. And so he said, fantastic. I love it. So who is it? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, it says that, like, to offset this, we're basically eliminating an FTE. And I was like, Gord, we have 7 people on the team. We can't eliminate anybody. He goes, well, then don't ever price it that way. Like, don't sell me that this is the benefit. The benefit is we're going to make our people better, faster, happier, less tired. He says, I'll worry about the costs, but, like, tell me a story that sticks with my people, and then I'll find the budget for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's good time. Well, Jon, what do we got? Where do folks find you? Obviously, I'll have links in the show notes and stuff. And for folks, they can go to ControlTheory, the website. And where do we find you if they want to chat and get connected?
ControlTheory.com is probably the best way. I'm on there too. And then, Gonzo, /Gonzo, and then Distillate, our commercial product that we talked about here. Best is a good way. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty active. Feel free to connect with me, chat with me, however, and maybe I'll see you at a meetup. I'll see you at a trade show here.
Yeah, shortly. Meetup season is starting. I think everybody's in SKO mode from the vendor world. It's like, this is always the time where it's the lightest time of the year because people are getting ready, but the meetups are already happening, and you aren't slowing down. I'm seeing blogs and I'm seeing features jumping out. So clearly the Gonzo and Distillate and the whole ControlTheory team are not resting on their laurels that you had a good 2025. You're starting 26 off strong.
That's right. We're in the we're accelerating in this part of the marathon.
That's it. Exactly. We don't know what mile we're at, but yeah. Awesome. Well, Jon, thank you very much. And folks, of course, make sure you check out and do follow both on LinkedIn, as well as if you're in the GitHub world, get in there and get it forked, throw a star, and get it in use, because I can tell you this stuff works, and I'm super proud to be able to share the story.
Thanks, Eric.